Detroit did not collapse overnight. It slowed almost politely, like a great engine losing compression. The streets still buzzed, the factories still breathed, the paychecks still arrived until the sound changed. And when the sound changed, an entire way of life began to fade. In the middle of the 20th century, Detroit did not feel like a city vulnerable to decline. It felt permanent, industrially ordained, like steel poured into a mold too large to crack. The air carried the scent of oil and warm metal, and beneath it lived a confidence so ordinary that few residents bothered to name it. Prosperity was not spectacle, it was routine. Factories defined the rhythm of the day. Dawn meant shift changes, afternoon meant whistles. Midnight meant floodlights glowing against low clouds, illuminating parking lots filled with identical cars built by hands that parked them only hours earlier. Work was abundant, repetitive, and by the standards of the era, astonishingly well paid. A high school diploma could purchase dignity, stability, and a mortgage. Entire families built middle-class lives from conveyor belts and torque wrenches. The streets mirrored this stability. Broad avenues pulsed with movement, streetcars rattling alongside sedans polished by pride. Downtown storefronts glittered. Department stores rose like monuments to consumption. Theaters, hotels, diners, and barbershops thrived not because of novelty, but because of sheer human volume. Detroit was a city swollen with workers, engineers, clerks, and managers, each link secured to the vast machinery of automobile production. The wealth generated by the industry reshaped geography itself. Neighborhoods expanded outward in confident rings. Brick homes multiplied. Lawns appeared where farmland once stretched. Shopping districts followed rooftops like shadows. Suburbs grew not as escapes, but as logical extensions of prosperity. The American promise, translated into square footage, unfolded in every direction. Yet embedded within this prosperity were tensions too subtle to alarm the moment. Success carried its own structural fragilities. Detroit's economy, though massive, was narrow. Its lifeblood flowed overwhelmingly from a single industry. Diversity of employment, the quiet insurance policy of resilient cities, remained secondary to the roaring dominance of automobiles. When nearly everyone benefits from the same engine, few consider what happens if that engine misfires. Automation arrived gradually, framed as progress rather than disruption. Machines replaced certain tasks with clinical efficiency. Output increased, costs fell, but efficiency, while profitable, was not neutral. Each technological improvement quietly reduced the need for labor. The transformation did not feel catastrophic, it felt incremental. One position eliminated, another consolidated. A department trimmed. The payroll shrank not with drama, but with arithmetic. At the same time, the city's demographic landscape shifted under pressures that prosperity alone could not smooth. Migration, opportunity, discrimination, and housing policy collided in complicated patterns. New residents arrived seeking work. Others moved outward, drawn by suburban developments and enabled by highway construction. Investment followed mobility. Tax bases began to stretch thin. Infrastructure, once a symbol of progress, became an accomplice to decentralization. Highways sliced through established neighborhoods, accelerating outward movement. The automobile, Detroit's proud creation, paradoxically empowered residents to live farther from the urban core. Retail, offices, and eventually entire corporate operations drifted toward suburban landscapes. The city's gravitational pull weakened, not because Detroit failed, but because its own product succeeded too well. Factories themselves evolved geographically. Land costs, logistics, and modernization favored larger facilities beyond traditional urban boundaries. Production did not disappear immediately, it migrated. The shift often unfolded invisibly to casual observers. A plant closed here, another opened there. Employment persisted, but the spatial relationship between jobs and the city loosened. Still, daily life retained its surface normalcy. Paychecks continued, traffic flowed, downtown lights flickered reliably each evening. Detroit remained busy, alive, confident, yet increasingly dependent on a delicate equilibrium of global competition, technological change, and corporate strategy. Globalization introduced pressures unfamiliar to earlier decades. Foreign manufacturers emerged with different cost structures, production philosophies, and market strategies. Competition intensified. Margins narrowed. Decisions once governed by domestic dominance now responded to international dynamics. Detroit's industrial giants, vast but not invincible, confronted realities beyond municipal control. For residents, the earliest signs of strain were rarely theatrical. A neighbor laid off. A store quietly shuttered. A building left vacant longer than seemed comfortable. Nothing screamed crisis. The city did not crack, it thinned. Population, once Detroit's inexhaustible strength, began to decline. Each departing family carried more than personal belongings. They carried purchasing power, property taxes, and civic energy. Vacancies multiplied with unsettling patience. Houses lingered unsold. Businesses recalculated viability. Municipal budgets tightened under shrinking revenues. And yet optimism persisted, stubborn and human. Detroit had weathered recessions before. The industry had stumbled before. The city had rebounded before. The narrative of resilience, reinforced by decades of growth, functioned as emotional infrastructure. Few cities surrender belief easily, but structural change rarely negotiates with belief. By the late 20th century, the shift in Detroit's soundscape became unmistakable. Where factories once hummed with relentless continuity, silence began to occupy measurable space. Not total silence, industry did not vanish entirely, but interruptions, pauses, gaps where noise once lived. Economic contraction moved from abstraction to lived experience. Layoffs grew less exceptional. Unemployment climbed. The dependable conveyor belt of wages, the mechanism that sustained mortgages, shops, restaurants, and municipal services, slowed unevenly. Each job lost reverberated outward through networks of consumption and taxation. Urban decline is rarely a single event. It is a feedback loop. Reduced employment shrinks income. Reduced income weakens spending. Weak spending pressures businesses. Business closures erode tax revenues. Declining revenues constrain public services. Constrained services accelerate outward migration. Migration further reduces revenues. The cycle tightens with mechanical indifference. Neighborhoods illustrated this loop with painful clarity. Vacant homes appeared sporadically at first, then with unsettling regularity. Maintenance faltered. Property values softened. Investment hesitated. Streets once animated by routine domestic rituals, children cycling, neighbors conversing, porches occupied, grew quieter, less predictable. Municipal systems strained under asymmetric demands. Infrastructure built for expansion now served contraction. Fixed costs persisted despite declining revenues. Schools, transportation, policing, and public works confronted arithmetic immune to nostalgia. Budgets do not scale gracefully downward. Crime, often misunderstood as a cause rather than a symptom, rose amid economic instability and social stress. Perception hardened. Media narratives amplified decline. External confidence weakened alongside internal morale. Detroit's challenges, complex and structural, increasingly condensed into simplified imagery of urban decay. Yet even during visible deterioration, the city retained continuity of life. People worked, adapted, endured. Small businesses persisted, communities organized, cultural production continued. Churches filled, music flowed. Detroit did not become empty, it became uneven, islands of vitality surrounded by widening zones of disinvestment. The automobile industry itself did not disappear, but its relationship to labor transformed irrevocably. Automation advanced. Global supply chains diversified production geography. Efficiency improved while employment elasticity diminished. The industrial base that once required vast human armies now functioned with leaner workforces. Corporate decisions, guided by profitability rather than municipal allegiance, redistributed operations according to global logic. Plants closed, others modernized elsewhere. The emotional geography of residents, tethered to factories that defined identity, collided with economic realities indifferent to place. Population loss accelerated. Each census captured contraction not merely as numbers but as lived absence. Schools closed, retail corridors hollowed, public transit routes adjusted to shrinking demand. Vacant land, once densely inhabited, reverted to unexpected openness. Physical decay acquired its own momentum. Buildings abandoned without maintenance deteriorated predictably, weather intruded. Materials failed. Demolition outpaced redevelopment. The urban landscape recorded economic history with brutal honesty. Still, Detroit's story resisted simple tragedy. Decline, while severe, coexisted with adaptation. Artists occupied forgotten spaces. Entrepreneurs experimented within low-cost environments. Community initiatives reclaimed neighborhoods block by block. Industrial ruins became both symbols of loss and canvases for reinvention. Because cities, unlike factories, are not single-purpose machines, Detroit's identity, once overwhelmingly industrial, began a long, uneven diversification. Technology, healthcare, education, design, and cultural industries emerged not as replacements, but as gradual additions. Recovery proved nonlinear, punctuated by setbacks, restructuring, and renewed experimentation. The collapse of dominance did not erase capability. It exposed dependency. Detroit before the auto boom collapse was not naive, nor was it destined. It was a city operating at extraordinary scale within a specific economic model. A model vulnerable to technological evolution, global competition, demographic mobility, and policy complexity. Prosperity contained the seeds of fragility precisely because it functioned so effectively for so long. What vanished was not merely employment, it was certainty. The certainty that industrial strength guaranteed permanence. The certainty that growth trajectories naturally extend. The certainty that economic centrality resists global redistribution. Detroit's transformation stands less as anomaly than as magnified illustration of structural change. Industries rise, technologies disrupt, capital migrates, populations move. Urban landscapes adapt, sometimes violently, sometimes slowly. And beneath every macroeconomic shift lie millions of micro-stories. Families recalibrating budgets, workers redefining skills, neighborhoods renegotiating survival. Communities inventing resilience from necessity rather than rhetoric. Detroit did not simply fall. It changed under pressures larger than any single decision, policy, or moment. Its streets, factories, and skylines became archives of industrial modernity, records of what happens when a city built around one dominant engine confronts a world that rewrites the rules of motion. Today, Detroit's narrative continues, layered, contested, unfinished. But to understand its present, one must first hear the earlier sound, the confident hum of a city convinced its engine would run forever. Because before the silence, there was always noise.